You are listening to Matt Harmless and this Harmless podcast, and this is a reading with Pastor Matt. We're in The Mortification of Sin by John Owen. This is chapter 13, the third part and final part of chapter 13. And we are going to be I'm going to be reading that last part where we're talking about rules to know whether God is speaking peace about a sin or it is false peace. Is God speaking peace about it or it is a false peace? And he's given some rules. A couple readings ago, first part of chapter 13, we read rule number 1: God is not speaking peace if there is no hatred of the sin or a self-loathing. You can listen to that one. Rule number 2 in the second part of chapter 13: God is not speaking peace if it is based on convictions and rational conclusions. Okay, so God is not speaking peace if it is based on convictions and rational conclusions. And I think that I could add the word alone, in and of themselves, by themselves, apart from that. That was an interesting read. Lots of things that left me wondering about in that one. I think I understand what he's talking about, but that was a challenging portion of it. We are ready this week for rules 3, 4, 5, and I think that's it. This shouldn't take us long. Rules 3 and 4 are short. Let's go ahead and I'm going to highlight rule number 3 here. We speak peace to ourselves when we do it carelessly. The prophet complains of this in some teachers. They have healed the wound of the daughter of my people carelessly. Uh, the same is true with some who heal their own wounds with a careless effort. A glance of faith to the promises will do it, and we are done. The apostle tells us that the word did not benefit some because it was not mixed with faith. It was not well tempered and mingled with faith. It is not a mere look to the word of mercy and the promise that heals, but mingling the promise with faith until it is incorporated into its very nature. Then the word will indeed do the soul good. If you had a wound in your conscience that was accompanied by weakness and anxiety, and you're now freed of it, how did you manage that? I looked to the promises of pardon and healing, and so I found peace. That may be so, but perhaps you were too hasty. You were too obvious. You have not fed on the promise in a way that mixes it with faith and diffuses all its virtue into your soul. You did it carelessly. Before long, you will find your wound breaking out again, and you will know that you are not cured. And so, again, I think that these are all pointing to a very similar thought, at least in my mind, the way I'm understanding it at this point. Um, and the similar thought is that taking the word, taking those promises, and slapping them on without really taking a minute in that relationship with the Father through the person of Jesus Christ by the power of the Spirit to say, God, how is this applied to me? What does this mean? What does this look like? Right? Rule number 4: God is not speaking peace if we are holding on to another sin. So if there's sin that we're holding on to, even not the one that specifically is in relation to these things, God is not speaking peace if we are holding on to another sin. Before I even read this, I know that I've found this to be true in my life when I'm repenting of sin and seeking God and praying about it and asking for forgiveness, all those things that go along with that, and wanting to do the right thing in regard to it. I cannot tell you how many times it pops in my mind something else that I know is sin, and I don't want to let go of that thing. I cannot help but think that this is exactly what he's going to be talking about here. We'll find out. Someone may speak peace to himself about one evil while having another evil, of no less importance to his spirit, that he has not brought to God. That man cries peace when there is none. A little to explain my meaning. Perhaps a man has neglected a spiritual duty again and again, when by rights it was due from him. His conscience is troubled, his soul is wounded, he has no quiet in his bones because of his sin. He applies himself to healing, and he finds peace. Meantime, there remains in his heart worldliness or pride or some other folly that seriously grieves the Spirit of God. It does not bother him, nor does he bother it. He better not think any of his alleged peace comes from God. It is better to have an equal respect for all of God's commandments. God will justify us from our sins, but he will not justify the smallest sin in us. Ooh, that's a good quote. He is a God of pure eyes than to gaze at wickedness. Again, I think that goes along with what I'm talking about. And maybe in me, that's an example of it. It's not really peace. And I'm like, yes, I'm forgiven by God. But if this other thing pops up, I'm not. It's not that I'm not forgiven. It's that I don't have this peace with God in that moment if God is bringing to my attention these other sins in my life. Does that make sense? Okay. Rule number 5, he has a little bit more detail with this one. God's not speaking peace if there is no humiliation in our souls. When men speak peace to their consciences on their own, God seldom speaks humiliation to their souls. God's peace is a humbling peace, a melting peace. This was David's case. He was never in deeper humiliation than when Nathan brought him news of his pardon. You ask, when may we take the comfort of a promise as our own and use it to quiet our heart in response to some particular wound? First, generally, when God speaks peace, he may do it in the very instant of the sin itself. He does it with such irresistible power that the soul must receive his mind in it. Sometimes he makes us wait longer, but when he does speak, whether sooner or later, whether we are sinning or repenting, and regardless of the condition of our souls, if God speaks, he must be acknowledged. There is nothing in our communion with him that troubles the Lord more, if I may say so, than our unbelieving fears that keep us from receiving the strong consolation that he's so willing to give us. You may now say, when God speaks peace, he must receive it. That is true. But how will we know when he speaks? Number 1, wish we could all get to the point of receiving peace when we are convinced that God speaks it and realize that it is our duty to receive it. But, number 2, there is a secret instinct in faith through which it knows the voice of Christ when he speaks. Just as the baby leaped in the womb when the Blessed Virgin came to Elizabeth, faith leaps in the heart when Christ draws near to it. My sheep, says Christ, know my voice. They know my voice, they are used to the sound of it, and they know when his lips are open to them full of grace. The spouse was sad and securely asleep, but as soon as Christ spoke, she cries, it is the voice of my beloved that speaks. She knew his voice, she was so familiar with him that she instantly recognized him, and so will you. If you make an effort to acquaint yourself with him and commune with him, you will easily discern between his voice and the voice of a stranger. And take this with you. When he does speak, he speaks like no man ever spoke. He speaks with power. One way or another, he will make your hearts burn within you as he did to the disciples. It's a reference to the Emmaus Road. He does it by putting his hand through the hole of the door, by putting his spirit in your hearts to take hold of you. The person who exercises his senses to discern good or evil, who improves his judgment and experience by constantly observing Christ's methods, by studying the way the Spirit operates and the effect his peace usually produces, is the best judge for himself when it is Christ who speaks. Secondly, if the word of the Lord does your soul good, then he speaks it. If it humbles you, cleanses you, and is useful for those purposes for which the promises are given, to endear, to cleanse, to melt, bind to obedience, to empty yourself, etc., then he speaks it. If you do not see these things in the peace you receive, then it is not from God, and sin will have a great opportunity to harden your heart. All right, that ends chapter 13. We have one chapter left in this great book. I hope that so far these things have been useful and helpful to you. Please, again, with any of these chapters, feel free to send me questions. You can contact me via email, matt@harmlessonline.net or mattharmless@gmail.com. You can also contact me. If you know me, you can call me. You can contact me on Facebook or Twitter, wherever you came across this. I think that if you're listening to this via Spotify, there's even a way to contact me through Spotify. You can even send me voice messages that way. So if you have any questions, do that. You can also call 217-662-3964. That goes directly to a voicemail, but you can also call and leave questions there as well. And if you call and do leave a voicemail question or a question through Spotify that's verbal, I hope that you're okay with me including that in some future podcast episode as a question from a listener, because I'd love to be able to do that at some point with some of the questions I've gotten. All right. Again, thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe.